You were freed from the spirit of rock and roll. What happened that day?
I was at church on a Sunday morning, and Hills Christian Life Centre, as it was known then, had been advertising for a long time that rock and roll music was evil, that it was the work of Satan. And I recognised one of the leaders who actually was working in radio at the time, and I thought, I'll go up to him and I'll say, this music's okay, isn't it? And he actually turned to me and he said, I need you to be freed from the spirit of rock and roll. He said, I know that you are following one of the high priests of Satan, which is Bruce Springsteen, and you need to go home now and you need to destroy all of that material.
So did you go, you went home and
I went
did
home
what?
And for about an hour and a half I cried and I cried and I cried and I ripped all the posters off the wall. And I broke the records, they're actually old records, and I broke them and I ripped out the cassettes and I cried and I prayed and I cried, and that was 1987.
Your parents introduced you to the Hills Christian Church when you were young, about 13, and they both were involved in the Pentecostal religion. Now, I want to talk a bit about Pentecostal religion. That is where there is a belief of it's common to find the supernatural in everyday life, and I guess an example of that would be talking in tongues. Is that right?
Glossalia, it's known as.
Glossalia?
That's its formal name,
there you
yes.
go.
Pentecostalism is very much about a physical experience with the supernatural, be it waving your hands or praying over people, or it's a real embodiment thing, and it is also punctuated by speaking in tongues.
What's it like to experience it?
It's interesting in a church environment where lots of different people are doing it at once. Then it can really be a free-for-all. It can be really scary. Once you're in tune with the culture, though, it seems completely normal. I thought everyone did it as a part of their childhood.
Did you speak in tongues?
Yeah, since I was 8 years old. I had always been raised in a Christian household, and I didn't know any different when I was 8 that we were going to a Pentecostal church. It's a lot of fun. I mean, there's a lot of happiness and fun, and the joy of the Lord is revealed.
You write about it quite movingly, actually. You talk about being on fire for God and how beautiful believing is. Can you explain some of what that beauty is?
It is. It's a very beautiful thing. It's a very simplistic story to believe, but it's all about a very personal and intimate relationship with God. You know, you're part of a big group that is there to save the world and is there to... You know, Hillsong, for example, has always portrayed themselves as a really fun church, very contemporary, and the music's great. You know, who wouldn't want to be there?
You actually say that you don't think you could have written this book without Hillsong Church. In many ways, they made you what you are today. How is that?
It's incredible. You get taught to be absolutely invincible. You get taught that you can overcome anything, that you can achieve anything through God, and it makes you. It makes you feel incredibly courageous and incredibly able to face the world with the power and the spiritual reinforcement that you believe you've been given.
The flip side to the beauty of believing in that sense of invincibility was a fear. You described being terrified and that demons could come in many forms. Where would demons come from?
In the 80s we were taught pretty much that demons were everywhere. They were hiding behind every tree and every bush, and if you let your guard down for a minute, those demons will come in and possess you and make you do things that you don't want to do.
Okay, so when did the enemy, which is what you refer to Satan as, when did the enemy start whispering doubt into your ear?
I would have been about 16, and I was still at the Hills Christian Life Centre. It was still a fairly small congregation, so there were still maybe 500 people there. And it was all I'd known for these years, and then I just started getting thoughts in my head. These people are crazy.
What was it that you suddenly saw that you thought was crazy?
I would watch people and it looked like they were participating in some kind of charade. And I didn't know how that was possible. Also, the tongues didn't make sense. Like, I thought, that's really gibberish. That can't be real. Ba 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 is what you hear.
Yeah.
And I thought, no, something's not right here.
When you were 24, you got a social work degree, and you ended up doing some work with the Salvos. And a very interesting phrase, you said, I was detoxed from toxic Christianity.
Yeah.
That's a very strong phrase, toxic Christianity. Is that how you view Pentecostalism at that point?
I have to say I do now. I spent 5 years working alongside Salvation Army officers who have a completely different outlook on what Christianity is. And they're very, very humble people. And they're very, very committed to serving the community.
And how did you see that as different to what you saw at Hillsong?
The Salvation Army are very much geared towards charity and gospel. And Hillsong was very much geared towards money, recruitment and fundraising.
I want to show you a bit of Brian Houston. This is from Australian Story in 2005.
I really have this belief that church should be enjoyed and not endured. Sadly, I think it is possible for church to be a very long hour. I want people to be able to be animated about their worship.
And I love walking into the 6 o'clock service and then bang, getting hit by the presence of God. It's cool. Tell someone next to you it's cool.
You write in the book that even today when you hear Brian's voice, it makes you feel better. How does Brian work for you?
That, when you go to Bible college, apparently you learn that when you say, tell the person next to you, it's just a way for when the pastor's lost his thought train. So turn to the person next to you and say, you look great. He's a very powerful speaker. His content is not very heavy, but he's very charismatic. And, you know, he's a voice of my childhood. He's a voice of, you know, leadership in my upbringing. So, you know, and he always sounds so happy and so pleased to be where he is and so proud of you that you're doing this thing with him, that you almost want to be a part of it all over.
It was 2002, and in fact it was a speech Brian made to the congregation, an important speech, which really started your, I think it's fair to say, your path to disillusionment. Can you talk us through that?
I went to see Pastor Brian talk about his father having been removed from ministry. And he proceeded to talk about, you know, having to have confronted his father over a serious, what he called a serious moral failure. These were allegations of sexual offences against teenage boys, which was never actually named on the day. So there was a serious moral failure. He'd had to confront his father about it. His father had confessed. The National Executive had then taken away his credentials, investigated and taken away Houston Senior's credentials, and that Brian Houston himself was crushed. And he asked for the congregation to pray for his family, for his wife and his children. And the congregation did. They stood up and they applauded him, and that was the end of that speech.
There was no reference to the people that have been abused or whose lives may have been damaged?
Absolutely no reference to the victims. There was no stance taken on child sexual assault or child abuse of any form or care for children. There was no standing up and saying, look, we will not tolerate this in our congregation. And in fact, what it made me wonder was, if this is how they treat these kinds of issues on the most public level that they've got, how are they treating them on smaller, more, you know, in more private arenas?
You raise a number of questions about Hillsong Church, and one of those is about prosperity theology, which is probably best summed up in the title of this book by Brian Houston, You Need More Money. Can you explain to us what prosperity theology is?
Prosperity theology is the belief, the absolute belief that according to the Bible, according to the verses in the Bible, God wants you to be rich. He wants you to have prosperity in every area of your life, particularly your finances. And that to not be that way is actually to be disobedient to the Word of God.
Why would God want you to be rich? What does that achieve?
You know, if the Christians can have all the wealth, then they can redistribute it as they wish to, you know, to the areas of poverty that they want to distribute it to, the areas of need that they see fit.
Well, Hillsong has a strong record of distributing to charity. This is what Brian Houston said on Australian Story about where some of their money goes.
There's various ways that we are able to fund the various projects and community programs that we're involved in, and they include everything from private enterprise to the church's own resources to members of the congregation to government grants. 60% of the total income goes towards helping people directly.
From your viewpoint, is that the whole picture?
It's very abstract. 60% of their money goes towards helping people directly. That could mean any number of things.
Do you suspect that under closer scrutiny that there is something questionable at the way Hillsong operates?
I can't argue that there's anything questionable. What I can argue that is questionable is the lack of transparency. So, you know, as much as they might say their books are open, everybody that I've interviewed who has asked to have a look at the books is told that they've got a bad attitude or they've got doubts, and therefore we get back to the story of sin and doubt. So,
you also talk about Bobby Houston and how you came to question some of her values. What is it, according to Bobby and the teachings of Hillsong, that kingdom women should aspire to be?
Bobby Houston, who's Brian's wife, is the women's leader for Hillsong. And she teaches from a proverb, from the book of Proverbs, number 31, which is about a devoted wife. So a kingdom woman should be a devoted wife. She should be a helper and a companion, which is what Eve was created for Adam. She should at all times be supportive of her husband's goals. That is what a kingdom woman is there for. And if she doesn't have a husband, she should be in training to get a good husband so that she can fulfil his goals.
In 2005 you went to the Colour Your World Hillsong Women's Conference, and this is really the moment where you decided you want to write a book. What happened there?
Hillsong are running the charity Compassion, which is on a child sponsorship model of, and they're promoting very heavily child sponsorship in Uganda. And they had a big photo of an African child with his hands behind. And the caption was, "Will you be my sponsor?" Like, at what point is this exploitation?
Nonetheless, it does seem to me to be perhaps in an overly strong way, but it seems to me to be people trying to do something that's worthwhile.
It's very clearly people trying to do something that will further the advancement of fundamentalist Christianity. This orphanage in Uganda is explicitly set up for the children to learn how to be Pentecostals, with hopes that one day there'll be a Pentecostal leader in Uganda.
So you're suggesting that Hillsong is primarily set up for recruitment
And
and
fundraising.
fundraising for itself, which would imply the faith that is apparently at its core is not necessarily a genuine faith. Is this more a question of you having lost your faith rather than the church having lost its?
It took a very long time to take my faith away from me. It was really the last thing I wanted to do, was to admit that all of this stuff was true. My opinions have changed again since I've been researching, and I've met so many people negatively affected by churches like this that it just added up to be, too many people with the same kinds of stories.
You refer to them as the walking wounded. Why are they wounded?
I found a very strong pattern in what happens when people show resistance. So everything's happy and everything's fine when you don't show any kind of resistance. If you show resistance to the pastors, the leadership, the program, the teaching, you're dealt with very severely.
What does severely mean?
Well, in cases there are people who have been told that they're demonic. And generally what has happened is that once people are showing enough resistance, that is going to need to be quelled immediately. So they're often ostracised, and other congregants are told not to have anything to do with them because they've got doubts, they're not for us, they must be against us. It's a very fundamentalist, polarised point of view.
Okay. When you told Brian and Bobby that you wanted to write this book, because you did, what happened? What was the response?
Well, I got a response from the general manager of Hillsong, who said that I had caused significant disruption, that I was never to go on Hillsong premises again, and that, no, they won't be helping me with the book.
I should point out that we have invited Brian and Bobby Houston to respond to Tanya's interview, and they have an open forum on the show if they wish to take it. This is the first interview you've done, so the wave is about to break over you, of the consequences of your book. Are you sure you've done the right thing?
I know absolutely that I've done the right thing. Every time I watch some Hillsong tape, I'm convinced, because when I started out I thought, ooh, where will I research? What will I do? And now all I have to do is watch Hillsong's own promotional material, and they will say to you explicitly that they want to build more buildings, but they need more money to do it. So, you know, there are no hidden meanings there. It's very explicit. And when you have a biblical worldview and you see the whole world through the, you know, the words of the Bible or the pastor that you've been trained by, you can't see it as simplistically at that. And it's obviously taken me years and years to separate it all out.
No, Tanya, thank you for speaking so clearly tonight.
Thank you
Appreciate it.
very much, Andrew.